speeches and table topics and evaluations too for Alan, because he's sorry that he can't be here and he would like to hear the speakers and the table topics, because as everybody knows, table topics is Alan's absolute favorite. He loves table topics. So with that said, first I need to have the helpers introduce what they're doing and why they're doing it. So all counter, Tom Riley, can you please stand up and say what you're doing and why you're doing it?
As a Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, being the out counter is one of the more difficult jobs because you tend to get caught up in what people are saying. That's the whole purpose of being a Toastmaster, to listen and to evaluate and to hopefully increase our capability. When you have to listen to how somebody says something as opposed to what they're saying, that's a whole other realm. Have you ever listened to a politician speak? Say, hello, fellow Americans. It's good to see. After a while, it just drives you crazy. There's nobody there to tell them, hey, you're saying too many odds, or you're playing with change in your pocket, or you're scratching your head, or you're doing something that detracts from your speech. And that's what we're trying to avoid tonight. We're trying to avoid those things like odds that detract and take our attention away from the speaker or what the speaker is saying and draw attention to the speaker, him or herself. And that's really not good. So I'll do my best. There is a 5-cent fine for every up to 25 cents.
Actually, we don't do these.
We haven't, well, I know, we haven't invoked that, I think, in 20 years now, but whatever. Is there a little ding-ding bell? I think I see the top of a little bell there. And this one actually works. Oh, it's another configuration.
It's a nice antique.
Whoa.
That's funny.
This gives you the opportunity, if you don't like somebody, you can really have a good, not going to do it during formal speeches, but I will keep track. And I'll try to be very, very sensitive to the needs of the speaker to educate while not disturbing. So it's a fine line. We'll see how I do.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you. And again, welcome back. And our timer tonight will be David Cordero. Thank you.
Thank you. This evening I'll be timing the speakers. And let's see here. For the formal speeches with Kamalika, at 8 minutes, she'll receive a green card. At 9 minutes, a yellow and red, or at 10 minutes, a red. And for Joy and Brent, you'll get a green at 5 minutes, a yellow at 6, and a red at 7. For the evaluations, they're 2 to 3 minutes each, and you'll get a green at 2 minutes, a yellow at 2.5, and a red at 3. And table topics, you'll get a green at 1 minute, yellow at 1.5, and red at 2 minutes.
Thank you. And our general evaluator is this one on, Josh.
Hi everyone, good morning, good evening. As a general evaluator, I will keep tab on everything, whatever, how the meeting has been conducted, how you are evaluating, how the speech is going on, how the table topics are going on, and I will call up all my functionaries at the end of the meeting and ask them for report, and I will evaluate the whole meeting as a overall. Thank you everyone.
Thank you, Mr. And our grammarian and radar person is Kamalika Roy.
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters. The role of a grammarian in any meeting session is to monitor the usage of the language of the session. Mercifully, we're not using French or German today, in which case we would be a laughing club. I will monitor the use of the English language, and I will also give you the word of the day, and I'll track the usage. The word of the day today is imagery, which is the use of rhetorical images or figurative description or illustration. The reason I chose this is because this is so important to storytelling for us as Toastmasters. It has several other meanings. I picked the two that are most relevant to Toastmasters. Once again, the word of the day just behind you, Linda, is imagery. And if anyone wants a copy, I have it
Where's your manual?
With Tom.
I'll give it a shot to you. I promise.
My second role is that of a radar person, which is to monitor our listening skills today. I will, at the end of this meeting, ask you a few questions and see how well you have been listening at today's session. Thank you, Madam Toastmaster.
Thank you. And our humorist today, please mark it on your program correction, will be Joy Gaylord. She's funny as mine.
Jeweler watched as a huge truck pulled up in front of his store. The back came down and an elephant walked out. It broke one of the windows with its tusk, and then using its trunk like a vacuum cleaner, sucked up all of the jewelry. The elephant then got back in the truck and it disappeared out of sight. When the jeweler finally regained his senses, he called the police. The detectives came and he told them his story. Could you describe the elephant? The cop asked. An elephant is an elephant, he replied. You've seen one, you've seen them all. What do you mean describe it? Well, said the policeman, there are two types of elephants, African and Indian. The Indian elephant has smaller ears and is not as large as the African elephant. I can't help you out, said the frustrated jeweler. He had a stocking pulled over his head.
Thank you, Joy. And now, time for our three fantastic speakers, starting with Kamalika. She will be doing a speech from the interpretive reading. And the executive summary of this project, she's doing project 1, read a story, is her successful interpretation of an author's story depends on your understanding of its overall meaning. She's supposed to identify the story's general purpose and break it down into parts and determine the meaning and purpose of each part. Then focus on communicating the story through her reading voice. Use vocal variety, tempo, rhythm, inflection, and pauses to convey the story's emotions and actions. Now, the objectives to read a story is to understand the elements of interpretive reading, to learn how to analyze a narrative and plan for effective interpretation, and to learn and apply vocal techniques that will aid in the effectiveness of the reading. Her speech tonight is 8 to 10 minutes. The subject of the story was, the reason she chose this subject is it's a story, it was interesting, and the story had a great narrative. The title of the story is A Tiger in the House by Ruskin Bond, Kamalika Roy, A Tiger in the House by Ruskin Bond.
Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters. A little bit about Ruskin Bond before I go into the story. Ruskin Bond is one of India's most popular authors. Ruskin Bond is actually British. However, he was born in India, in the northern part of India in 1934. He lived in a place called Kasauli, which is very close to the foothills of Himalayas in Dehradun. A little bit about the author from the book itself. Ruskin Bond was born in 1934 in Kasauli, a rural area of India. A full-time writer since the age of 22, he published several novels, short stories, and books for children. He has said of his work, "My interests, children, mountains, folklore, nature, are embodied in these books. Once you have lived in the Himalayas, you belong to them and must come back again and again. There is no escape." A Tiger in the House comes from his best-known collection, Time Stops at Shanli and Other Stories, which were published in 1989. Now, the big thing about Ruskin Bond's story is how vivid they are in terms of narrative and imagery. This particular story is a story of a tiger, how the tiger was acquired and what happens to the tiger at the end. The reason I chose this story is also because the climax is a little bit of a surprise. I broke the story down into 4 parts. The first part of the story talks about a British hunting party during the days of the Raj in India. And this is all about ceremony, grandeur, pomp. Ruskin Bond writes, Timothy, the tiger cub, was discovered by grandfather on a hunting expedition in the Turai jungles near Dera. Grandfather was no shikari. Shikari is the Indian word for hunter. But as he knew the forest of the Sivalik hills better than most people, he was persuaded to accompany a party. It consisted of very important persons in Delhi. At that time, Delhi was the capital of the British government in India, to advise on the terrain and the direction the beaters should take once a tiger had been spotted. So basically, the beaters would go around beating to herd the tiger into an area where the hunters could then hunt. But Ruskin Bond introduces a little bit of a twist. He talks about the camp. The camp itself was sumptuous. 7 large tents, one for each hunter. A dining tent, a number of servants' tents. The dinner was very good. So it almost seems like it wasn't so much hunting, but almost like a trip to the spa or a resort. Grandfather admitted afterwards, it was not often that one saw hot water plates, finger glasses, and 7 or 8 courses in a tent in the jungle. When I read this section, I was thinking, was this really hunting or was this something else going on? He goes on to say there were also some 15 elephants, 4 of them for the hunters, and the others especially trained for taking part in the feat. So this lays the ground for the hunting party. And then what happens when you get in a situation like this? None of them were actually hunters. The next paragraph explains what they were. The sportsmen never saw a tiger, nor did they shoot anything else, though they saw a number of deer, peacocks, and a wild boar. They were giving up all hope of finding a tiger and were beginning to shoot at jackals. So they were very frustrated at this point. When grandfather, strolling down the forest path at some distance from the rest of the party, discovered a little tiger. He picked him up and brought him home. That was their acquisition of a tiger. And it adds a comment here saying, he had the distinction of being the only member of the party to have bagged any game, dead or alive. So that was the description of the party. Now, what happens to the tiger? At first, the tiger cub, who was named Timothy by grandfather, was brought up entirely on milk given to him in a feeding bottle by our cook, Mahmood. But the milk proved too rich for him, and he was put on a diet of raw mutton and cod liver oil, to be followed later by a more tempting diet of pigeons and rabbits. Timothy was provided 2 companions, Toto the monkey, who was bold enough to pull the young tiger by its tail and climb up the curtains if Timothy lost his temper, and a small mongrel puppy found on the road by grandfather. At first, Timothy appeared to be quite afraid of the puppy and darted back with a spring if it came too near. He would make absurd dashes at it with his large 4 claws and then retreat to a ridiculously safe distance. So this gives you a very nice idea of a baby tiger playing with other baby animals. It's just like any other baby animal, tries to go towards another and then retreats. One of Timothy's favorite amusements was to stalk anyone who would play with him, and so when I came to live with grandfather, I became one of the tiger's favorites. With a crafty look in his glittering eye and his body crouching, he would creep closer and closer to me, suddenly making a dash at my feet, rolling over on his back and kicking with delight. So it's almost like a cat, and pretending to bite my ankles. So far so good, a little tiger growing up in the family. Soon Timothy was larger, and when this boy took him out for walks, he would start to look at other people's dogs and cats, because after all, he was a tiger. So the writer says, I had difficulty in keeping up with him. His favorite place in the house was the drawing room or the living room, and he would make himself comfortable on the long sofa. reclining there with great dignity and snarling at anyone who tried to get him off. Timothy had very clean habits. He would scrub his face with his paws exactly like a cat. He slept at night in the cook's quarters and was always delighted at being let out in the morning. "One of these days," said grandmother, "we are going to find Timothy sitting on Mahmoud's bed and no sign of the cook except for the clothes and shoes." Of course, it never came to that. When Timothy was about 6 months of age, a change came over him. He grew steadily less friendly. When he went out for a walk with me, he would try to steal away to stalk a cat or someone's pet picnics. Sometimes at night we would hear frenzied cackling from the poultry house, and in the morning there would be feathers lying all over the place. Well, that's what you get when you bring a tiger in as a pet. Finally, when he began to stalk Mahmoud, grandfather decided it was time to transfer him to the zoo. The third part of the story is what happens to Timothy when he gets to the zoo. The nearest zoo was at Lucknow, 200 miles away. Reserving a first-class compartment for himself and Timothy, no one would share a compartment with them. Grandfather took him to Lucknow, where the zoo authorities were only too glad to receive him as a gift, a well-fed and fairly civilized tiger. Now we come to the climax, which is where the twist is. About 6 months later, when my grandparents were visiting relatives in Lucknow, grandfather took the opportunity of calling at the zoo to see how Timothy was getting on. I was not there to accompany him. Arriving at the zoo, grandfather made straight for the particular cage in which Timothy had been. The tiger was there, crouched in a corner, full grown and with magnificent striped coat. "Hello, Timothy," said grandfather. Climbing the railing with ease, he put his arms through the bars of the cage and patted the tiger. It licked grandfather's arms and only sprang away when a leopard nearby snarled at it. Grandfather shooed the leopard away. A number of people had gathered. When a keeper pushed his way and asked him, "What are you doing?" "I'm talking to Timothy," said grandfather. "Weren't you here when I gave him to the zoo last time?" "I haven't been here very long," said the zookeeper. "Why don't you put him somewhere else? That leopard keeps on frightening him. I'll go and see the superintendent about it." So grandfather goes to see the superintendent. When he comes back, there's another keeper there. "You remember me," says grandfather. And grandfather's already up the railing, patting the tiger one more time. "Now, why don't you transfer Timothy to another cage, away from this stupid leopard?" "But sir," stammered the keeper, "it's not your tiger." I know, I realize he's no longer mine, but you might at least take a suggestion or two from me." "I remember your tiger very well," said the keeper. "He died 2 months ago." "Died?" exclaimed grandfather. "Yes, sir, of pneumonia. This tiger was trapped in the hills only last month, and he's very dangerous." Grandfather could think of nothing to say. The tiger was still licking his arm with increasing relish. Grandfather took what seemed to be an age to withdraw his hand from the cage slowly. With his face near the tiger's, he mumbled, "Good night, Timothy," and giving the keeper a scornful look, he briskly walked away from the zoo. Madam Toastmaster.